I used paper to create this antique barber pole for my Old West hotel. I used a little bit of foam board, some food packaging, and some used copy paper. Starting with the base of the barber pole, I cut a square. I want the bottom a little wider than the top, so I taper it on each side. After looking at my inspiration pictures, I decide I want to make it a little bit shorter. I trace and cut out that shape 7 more times to give me all 4 sides of the base. On one of the base pieces, I draw out an overlay that looks something like this. Then I carefully cut it out. I made sure to use a new blade. I trace it onto 3 of the pieces I previously cut, and that gives me all the sides and an overlay for each one. Then I glued the overlay to each one of the pieces. I also used my X-Acto knife and scratched in some rough wood grain on the overlay. These are all of the base pieces. To create the wooden base of the barber pole, glue the pieces together at the sides. I traced the base onto some food packaging and I added a 1/16 of an inch all around. I cut it out and glued that piece to some other food packaging. Cut that out, and this is the bottom of the base. If you know me, I had to sand, so I sanded the sharp edges to make it look worn. Then I glued the base onto the bottom. You can see the little lip that was created by adding a 1/16 of an inch to the traced bottom. A viewer recently gave me a really great tip: to use air dry clay to fill in gaps. I used some of my watered down clay and gave it a try. Once it's dry, it sands easily. Thank you so much for that helpful tip. I created the top of my base the same as the bottom, except I made 2 instead of 1. Here I'm cutting a piece of foam board smaller than the top. I cut out 1 more when I was sure of the size and glued them together. Here's how that piece looks with one of those base tops. It has a lip all the way around. I needed to cover the sides of the foam board, so this scrap piece was the perfect fit. Then I glued the 2 top base pieces to the foam board. Here I'm gluing the top to the base. Here's how it's looking so far. I sealed it with some Mod Podge, and now I'm giving it a quick sloppy coat of brown paint. And now the base construction is finished. It's time to start creating the barber pole now. I cut several strips of copy paper. I used these strips to quill a large and a small disc that will be the base of the pole and the top. To give the disc a rounded edge, the last piece I quill on is a long, slender triangle. I'm checking the size to make sure it's wide enough. To keep the disc from unraveling, I apply glue to each side of both discs. Even though the side is rounded, I'm sanding it to smooth it out some more. I don't have a dowel, so I'm making something similar with paper. I only need a short paper dowel, so I folded the long edge over of this piece of copy paper and trimmed it off, creating a smaller rectangle. Starting in the corner, I use a bamboo skewer and I start rolling it from the one corner. I continue to roll up the entire page. I didn't roll it too tightly though, otherwise I wouldn't be able to remove the bamboo skewer, and then I glued the tip of the paper to secure it. I used another skewer to push that one out. I guess I could have removed that skewer before it was completely rolled up. I gently squeezed the paper dowel to see where it was stronger. I lined it up on my cutting mat to keep it straight when I trimmed off what I didn't need. As long as I didn't cut away where I glued it, it holds together pretty well. I'll be paper quilling onto this instead of my quilling tool. Here I'm just checking out the height of the pole. It's going to sit on my hotel porch, so I don't want it to be too tall. I want my pole to be wider at the bottom and to appear as if it has a carved wood disc in the middle. I glued a couple of strips of paper together. They are the width I want my bottom half of the pole to be. Then I quilled them onto my paper dowel. This really helps thicken up the pole. I cut some more paper the same width, except I tapered one side. Keeping my straight edge lined up with the bottom, I rolled it up. This slowly creates a taper on the pole. For the disc in the middle, I just rolled up some paper like I did for the disc I made previously. Sometimes I just pull it too tight and it breaks. It's okay, I just re-roll it and glue the part that tore off back on. And just like the disc that I made previously, I roll a long, slender, triangular piece to create the curved edge. This makes it look like that disc is part of the whole post. The top half of the barber pole is not as thick as the bottom, but I still roll a partial strip to strengthen it and thicken it up just a little bit more. It still needs to taper, so I cut a strip that's straight on one side and tapers on the opposite, and then I keep the straight edges lined up when I roll it up. On this top half of the barber pole, the straight edge is not the top, the straight edge is by the disc because I want it to taper up. This is how the barber pole is looking so far. I base coat with gesso 2 or 3 layers, and I sand in between each one. I do this to make the paper lines disappear. When I was sanding, I had to remember to sand with the paper and not against it. Otherwise, it just tears it up rather than smoothing it out. To secure everything and help smooth any paper lines left, I coat it with wood glue. Then I paint the entire pole white. I base coat the disc with the wood glue and painted them blue. I'm not very good at painting, and I knew I couldn't paint the stripes freehand, so I used masking tape that I cut to the width I wanted the stripes, and then I wrapped it around the pole. I traced each side of the tape. Here you can see that I have the tape laid out for the red as well. Then I removed the tape and painted in my lines. I'm very pleased with how this method turned out. It made it so much easier. I did the very same thing for the red stripes. While I was researching pictures of antique barber poles, it was very interesting to learn what the colors signify. The white represents bandages because they did a lot of bloodletting back in that time period, and the red represents the blood. And I've heard different things about the blue, but supposedly it represents the vein. Going back to the base of the barber pole, I painted in the panels on each side a light color. That made a nice background for the water slide decals I made. The overlays, though, really gave me a hard time trying to get these water slide decals on there straight. I paper quilled a little cup area to hold a painted bead for the very top. I glued a toothpick at the bottom of the pole, and then I drilled a hole in the base and glued on the pole. I forgot to show it, but I roughed up the pole a little bit with some sandpaper so it wouldn't look so new, and I added some chalk pastel to kind of dirty it up a little bit. Then I just glued on the painted bead. My antique barber pole is finished. I had a lot of fun figuring out how to paper quill this pole where it would look like painted carved wood. I hope that I have inspired you. Thank you so much for watching.